So what I want to do is I want to start the conversation with just an ounce of context. Can you guys share how you got together and then ultimately like the professional path that led you to the hospitality group?
Bruce, go
Sure.
ahead. Sure.
Yeah, I'm gonna. We Michael's the color. I'm the play-by-play. We met in the early aughts at Michael's two-star Michelin Alto, which was almost a life-changing restaurant at 53rd and Madison, which is where Santi is now. We became fast friends. We had a little posse of food friends, purveyors, chefs, people in the industry. And, we would go to the wine and food festivals all the time. We'd hang out. Um, Occasionally I would have, Michael and his family and over to my house for dinner, and he would immediately take over everything because I was always messing it up. But great friends. I'm a lawyer to the food industry. I've done that for a long time. I worked with Michael professionally, so we were friends. We were, professional cohorts, and then COVID happened. Michael left the Alta Maria group, and in the midst of worldwide devastation, we were sensing an opportunity to present Michael's amazing food in, kind of a new and innovative way and work together and achieve something. So that's how it all happened.
Michael, what inspired you to leave what seemed like a really successful career? I'm sure a lot of people in your circle and within the industry probably turned to you and said, you got a good thing going. Why would you pivot?
Sure. I think it was just a moment of opportunity in the sense that, you really didn't know what was going to happen next. We were in this, spiral, from March to April to May, in the beginning of COVID. And it was just a moment in which I had, done what I could do at the Alta Maria Group, and decided that it was time that I go out and do it, for myself and on my own, partnering with someone that could, help me achieve, my next, path in my culinary career, the next rung on the ladder, if you will.
And
And so that's really how it happened.
well, and I think for many of us, what that ultimately translates to is more risk, less money, and more work. But the two of you seem really intentional. So I would ask you, like, as you initially approached the partnership, like, how did you establish like concrete roles and a plan to make sure? Because, like, Bruce, especially as a lawyer, I mean, I think every entrepreneurial venture starts out with like, how hard could this possibly be? And then ultimately you end up across the desk from a lawyer that is explaining
Sure, of
all of the
course.
ways. So, you were able to have a very sober look going into this. What guardrails were you guys able to put into place in the conceptual phase to make sure that didn't happen?
To start, one thing that worked out very well is Michael and I, because we were friends, because we knew each other, because we had a professional relationship, we kind of knew each other's strengths and weaknesses. And, in the culinary world, there is no one, I have the most incredible respect. So even though I think I know a lot about food, Michael's forgotten more than I'll ever know. And the fortunate part, and I recommend this for any partnership, is to know your lane. I do not, his world is his world, and I give him incredible autonomy as a partner, and my world is my world, and he gives me, and we're like, we go off and do our own thing, and then at the end of the day, we kind of catch up. Like, what did you do today? Oh, what did you do today? And that is a great partnership.
How does that relate to difficult conversations? So my financier and my business partner in my restaurant group was my best friend. He was about 12 years older than me, and when we went into business together, I was 30. I think I just turned 30 when we opened the first place that we owned together. And I would argue that I probably spent that first half decade um, trying to get the courage to be honest with someone that I loved. I loved deeply, right, on a personal level, and I didn't want to offend, and I didn't want to disappoint. But I think a critical skill in any partnership, in any business venture, is being able to be honest and direct and candid. So we can all say this is a safe space, right? But then the practical applications of that are rarely executed to spec. So how do you guys create open lines of communication when there is a foundation of, personal interest and deep love?
Listen, I think we respect each other immensely, and I think that you obviously we have trust in each other, and I trust his ability and his business acumen, his legal acumen, and this is a very, very difficult landscape that we are working on right now. The fact that everything from social media to, I mean, restaurant, the restaurant part of it is easy. The cooking part of it is the easy part, if you will. Balancing, cost of goods sold and all the, I mean, it's infinite, all the different things that we work on a daily basis. And in fact, sometimes we think, why did we choose this? You could make no one want to do this. You can't force anybody to be in the kitchen, let alone be in the restaurant business, in totality. But I think that's really, we have a very good relationship in the sense that we can talk to each other about everything. And if he's feeling something about the menu, or he's feeling something that, you know, um, that he doesn't think is right, because he has a different point of view, because he is somebody who eats out often, much more so than I do. I mean, I eat often a lot, but it's Japanese, Chinese food, and it's takeout, and it's this kind of thing. And where Bruce is going out, for business meetings in his other life as well as a lawyer, and so therefore he has a perspective, knowing what guests want to eat and how they want to eat, and if it's heavy, if it's light, um, and the same thing as I. I mean, I want to think that I have those same types of thoughts when it comes to food, because I've been doing this for so many years in New York, and I know that if I knock somebody out every single day with this very rich food, or butter laden food, obviously there's rich things on the menu at Santi, or at any of the restaurants that we have in the group, but we balance that with acidity and crudos, and then you can have a tortellini alla panna, something with cream and parmigiano, but the balance of that is what really lets me, have this partnership with Bruce, and being able to uh, trust his instincts, and I trust my instincts, and we kind of really meet in the middle usually.
And so, what does it look like?
Is
So
that a good?
they're
Is
like,
that a good? Is that factual, Bruce? Yeah, I mean,
No, no, I actually, no, I agree. Again,
like I'm not.
it,
I'll tell you right now, Josh. I'm not feeling the checks and the stripes right now.
yeah, it's,
I can be. So I'm blatantly. I mean, I am brutally honest all the time. Like the other day, he was going out. He was going out to a new restaurant. Okay, and it's a new restaurant close to us, and he said, "Hey, I think I should change." And I turned around and looked at him off the line. I go, "Yeah, get home and change. You're right. You need to change." So,
it,
so
that was actually true. I mean, I did go home. I cried, and then I went and changed
yeah,
yes,
to a
no,
for
new outfit.
sure.
No,
It's
I mean,
mental
again,
health is huge, Bruce. It's important that you cried about it.
yeah, well, it's okay. I'm a sensitive guy. Uh, with each other knowing our own lanes, I we have developed like a shorthand. We went over food. We just opened up an incredible restaurant called the Lion's Den last night, in fact. But 2 nights ago, we were doing final touches on Michael's food, and he knows that 99.9% of the food is just genius. And if I say a comment, or I do like shorthand, he's like, "Yep, I don't even have to finish my sentence." And he's like, "Nope, I got it fixed." There's not, to be honest, there's not a lot of sensitivity involved. He's a professional. He knows that, like the last look is always valuable. I get in my world too, and every once in a while he'll be like, "Oh, X, Y, or Z in the finance world or in the legal world," or like, "Did you think of that?" I'll be like, "Good point." Yeah, so it's very, very functional.
Let's talk about the elements of success, the critical elements of success. I mean, especially as like, you're just coming off an opening. And, I think to myself, how many times I've sat across from someone in these interviews, and just being kind of awestruck by the fact that I really don't think they understand why they're successful and what the true elements of success are. I'll sit across from people and they'll say, listen, If you have best in class food, best in class beverage, and excellent, consistent service, you're going to make it. To which I would argue, with a wider worldview, like restaurants with all of those things in spades go out of business every single day of the week. Those are certainly contributing factors, but they certainly aren't the only factors. So once you had achieved a certain level of success, what are the metrics you began to double down on? What are the things you began to look for as you would cobble together a new concept that would help to not guarantee success, but better ensure it?
I mean, it's focusing on our the strong suits. Not whether it's our focus on the crudo game. Obviously handmade pastas. Those are all real core elements of the cuisine that I do with the Bibianco team. So go ahead, Bruce, and explain it. In a different.
Well,
Consistency, as you said, Josh, is the number one thing. Once we nail the recipes and we have the food down and at our after 20 some restaurants now in this kind of Italian vein that I'm doing, we know what works and what doesn't. But then, every market is different. For example, Dallas has a different feel than Carranza at Atlantis, or
Sure.
Santi in New York City. They're all different, but there's definitely a DNA that goes through all the restaurants. But go ahead, Bruce.
I've answered this question in a different way before, and like I think of it as the three C's, which is the cuisine, which we certainly have, the consistency, which we're talking about. And for Michael and myself, and part of the reason why we decided to work together is this conviviality. And, during COVID, we entertained at each other's houses all the time. And what we said, especially with our flagship restaurant, Santi in New York, is we want to entertain the client as if they were coming to our house. We want to know their names. We want to know what they like in terms of drink, and we want them to feel special. We want the experience to be different than another restaurant. But, I agree with you. I have seen incredible restaurants, like really incredible restaurants. I'll give you an example, Coleman, which is not here. And it's a great chef, great food, cool vibe. It was excellent, not here. And there are myriad examples of that. One of the things that Michael and I talk about all the time, and this is going to sound contrary to most of your listeners, is we try not to take the last penny. We try to give as much back to the client without crushing ourselves. We kind of, people want to race to the highest amount of profits. We sort of want to go the other direction. We want to give the most quality at break even or better. That's our credo. And I think that people, if you can go to a Michael White restaurant and get a bowl of pasta, and a drink and be out for essentially a modest amount of money compared to all of our competitors, it's life changing, and we want to deliver value, and I think people recognize that now.
Let's talk about that. Let's unpack that for a minute because I think it's really interesting. I think people listening, I think at first glance they would think you're talking about price, but you're not. You're actually talking about positioning. What you're talking about is how your restaurants fit into people's lives. When I went from nightlife into fine dining, what I figured out was we're doing best in class work, or at least we're attempting to do so. And if I absolutely murder it at $125 a person, when am I going to see you again, Bruce? Like, not next week, not next month. The total addressable market in full service, especially in fine dining, it's got to be massive, because I'm only going to see you a few times a year, unless I'm building out ancillary use cases. I think that one of the questions that you guys answer, and I went through all of your digital services before sitting down with you. I think you do a really good job, and I think this is where most people miss the mark in explaining how these concepts fit into people's lives. You're very explicit with it, right? Almost all fine dining is built around milestones and revelry. which is fantastic. But again, that creates a massive hurdle. Whereas it seems like what you guys are working towards across almost all concepts is actually accessibility and frequency, which is a different position entirely. Talk to me about a volume play, especially in fine dining and full service, and what that looks like, especially in major metros.
Well, I'll talk a little bit about that. I think a lot in terms of anecdotes and stories, and that's how I learn and that's how I share knowledge. Michael taught me a great lesson when, in one of our first ventures, we did a temporary gig at the Four Seasons in Florida. And so that has two challenges. When you're captive at a hotel, first of all, you want to capture the client for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, if you can. And also, if someone is staying there for a week, you would love to have them at your restaurant 3 and 4, 5 times a week. And this knowledge is you have to make the experience very, very different from meal period to meal period, because you can't be like, oh my God, I had eggs over there. I don't want to go back there and have an expensive, beautiful dinner. So you have to do that. And that was a learning curve for me personally. And secondly, Michael's food is very hot, elevated, very fine dining, but it's also very approachable. So you can go to Michael White Bianco restaurant and have chicken one night. You could have an incredible lobster salad. You could have pasta once or twice, and you can have an incredible piece of bronzino or sea bass. And like you've eaten at his restaurant 4 times in 1 week. And we find that our really great customers, they do that. And some of them come and we'll have pasta 3 times a week.
And so, are
We
there
love repeat
systems?
offenders. We
I
love
mean,
repeat
who
offenders.
doesn't?
Right. Exactly.
One of the transformative things for me, one of the paradigm shifts for me in my restaurant group was this thought that I had while walking the dog one day, which was, what if everyone that came to the restaurant once a month came in twice? I mean, that doesn't seem like a stretch. It doesn't seem like it's that hard to do. What if everybody that came in once a quarter came in once a month? And what if everybody that came in once a year came in twice a year? Like it just didn't seem like this was a big push. It was really just about occasion and building an infrastructure where, I was able to make the offer at the time they were most likely to accept the offer without discounting, without freebies. What does frequency look like for you guys? How are you reminding people that you exist and why they love you in a consistent way?
Listen, obviously with social, we're working constantly on social, and also the customers. Lunch is such an easy play for us. Lunch has become very, very strong. For example, at Santi in New York City, and once you've been to lunch, it turns into dinner. It turns into dinner whether you want it to or not. I mean, whether you're the wife came first or the husband came first or vice versa. Lunch is a great avenue to get dinner customers to come to your restaurant for a special occasion. We see people at lunch 3, 4 times a week, same people, same tables. They want the same table. But then there's other people that come. But we're very fortunate. And I tell you also that those also turn into special occasions in the private dining room as well. So there's a lot of connectivity between all the different spaces, and meal periods as well.
Let's talk about
Yeah,
private dining.
You have
No, go
something
ahead,
to add to
Bruce.
that, Bruce? Please.
Go ahead,
I was
Bruce.
going to add something also that I think, I spend most of my time at Santi of all of our restaurants. And, one thing that actually makes it hard on the staff, but great for the customer, is the frequency in which we change things up. There'll be ramps, and then, that will be the ingredient of the week. And then, peas will come in. And so like when you're having chicken, or game hen or whatever the protein is, this setup evolves frequently. And that messaging is telling the client in a very subtle way, well, this week you can try, the guinea hen with a pea setup. And then next week you can try the same protein because we're going to Morels because it's the change of season. And they want to come back because they want to A, they don't want to miss it, and B, they want to try the next thing. So I think that messaging goes with that. So anyway, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
That's a
off.
very extremely valid point. I missed it.
what about location? So you look at Santee and where Santee's located, right? And I think that it lends itself to lunch business. I think it lends itself to dinner business. I think you're 2 blocks in a different direction. It could be a different story. Um, as you guys have looked at opportunities for growth and expansion, talk to me about your approach to location. You know, believing, I'm sure, especially Bruce, you as an outsider, right? That like location is everything, right?
Absolutely. No, I just giggled because, I'll send something to him or he'll send something to me. I won't even respond to it. I'll just junk it right away because, you know, yeah, I knew something that was a very good restaurant there died before. Why would I want to go and try to resurrect the space? That kind of thing. But, obviously, Bruce, you see a lot of offers all the time come across your
Yeah,
desk,
we,
but
we see it all. We do see it all the time. And Michael is such a sought after chef that people are like, oh, I want to get a 5 Michelin star, 6 Michelin star chef in my restaurant. You know, to talk more mile high viewpoint, we want to be in areas where people are aspirational regarding cuisine. They want new, better, best. They want incredible food. And there are places that, are on the rise. We just opened in Dallas, and Dallas is a city that seems to have discovered good food. And there are incredible restaurants popping up all over. Michelin is just recognized and given stars for the first time. And it's like, you know what? We want to be in a place where people appreciate the quality of the food. Because, our food, um, it's just of a different level. We make our butter. We don't buy butter and put it into molds. We start with cream from a farm in New Jersey, and it takes 3 days to make our butter, and it's served in a mold at Santi with mold and salt, and it's artistry. Um,
and we
What
give the
is
butter
the
away. The bread and butter is free at not
right?
free, but it's not
yeah, it's not the
no, we
Well,
same
don't
food
charge.
charge.
it concerns me, as it relates to, you think about how expensive it is to do business in New York, right? I don't know what your occupancy is. I know it's through the fucking roof. Right. Plus, labor is incredibly expensive as well. Cost of goods have never been higher and probably isn't going to go down because what we've seen is once they figure out that everyone doesn't go out of business when they raise prices, they never really go back down to where, the levels they were at before. And so much of what we're talking about as it relates to like what makes the restaurant special directly tracks back to labor, right? Manufacturing. And then we talked about service standards as well. If everything is just getting more expensive and you guys have this firm commitment, which I think really resonates in New York, but is even more important in Dallas, right? Where there's almost no context for, truly expensive food at this elevated level, with very few exceptions. Um, how are you able to make the dollars make sense so that you're making the money that you need to candidly make it worth your time? Because Bruce, you could probably just be a lawyer and make a shit ton of money. Michael, you could go work for and with anyone on the planet that would pay you an absolute fortune to put in half the effort you're putting in now. Right? So how do you make the dollars make sense?
So, I mean, in the kitchen where it's efficiencies, that's really the thing that when it comes to labor, sometimes when we're hand making chocolates and we have chocolate service at Santi, there's one person that's doing that, and so you have to, can I justify this labor in order to do that, and then how do I, you know. At Santi, for example, all the pastas are handmade. They're not extruded. In some of our restaurants, we make half by hand and half extruded. It's still fresh pasta, but we have the aid of the machine making pacchetti or spaghetti or bucatini. An amazing product, but that saves a lot on labor. The labor that it takes to make a pasta program come to life at Santi is 3 people. There's 4 person team, and there's on 3 a day, and there's 3 days that there are 4 people making pasta. So I mean, it's not we're making busiati, we're making everything by hand. So it's not easy, but it's a lot of balancing. It's about using products in the right way, no wastage whatsoever. When it comes to reutilizing everything, not reutilizing, but utilizing everything. extremely important. And then, we want to use the whatever price bracket we're in, we want to use the very finest ingredients that we can in that price, as Bruce said at the outset of the discussion, that we want to use. If I have $30 to spend, I'm going to use the best products I can. I'm not going to use $20 worth of products in a $30 scheme, is what I'm really trying to say.
Yeah.
And that's why our customers are coming back, in my estimation, for sure.
Bruce, anything to add to that?
Well, I went to business school, and there's like many adages of the 80-20 rule, you want to get your best customers to repeat. And, people try to have this mythical, oh, well, we can make 20% on our gross revenue or 25%. And God bless, I think it's very, very hard to do something like that. And it's really hard to do that on a sustained period of time, because success is not whether you're successful for a year, it's whether you're
Right.
successful for 10 years. Raoul's is my favorite example of the longest lived, uber successful, cool place. I think it's genius. And I used to go there in the 1980s, not to date myself. But we feel that a customer, if you're making 15% or 10% or 5, like if we can make 5%, and to your point, get that customer back many times a week, you'll make it up in volume, and you'll make it up in dedication, and you'll make it up in loyalty. You get a lot of repeat business. You keep your margins low, because you never, ever, ever want someone to feel ripped off. Because once they feel ripped off, it's like we've cheated on them. If they feel that we've been disloyal to them, they will not be loyal to us.
And I heard what both of you said. Would it be an oversimplification to say that the answer that both of you supplied was a strong top line? That, like, what you're talking about are the leading indicators, that the way that you're able to make money is by making a shit ton of money, which ultimately offsets it. And that you're, everything that we're talking about, because like we can talk about efficiencies, Michael, but you're making your own butter. That is not efficient, right?
No,
it is most
exactly.
efficient to just buy it, right? But like you guys have engineered the inputs that will ultimately generate that outputted top line. And if not, I guess, right, you would just reimagine it without compromise in a new
For
form
sure.
or fashion.
Absolutely. Especially on when it comes to labor on a line, on the cooking line, it takes the same amount of people to do 100 people as it does to do 150 people.
Absolutely.
Obviously, and that is, I don't need to add another pasta person or another, hot apps person. So because a sous chef steps over and does that, that's where it lies. The problem with my efficiencies is that it still takes me, the same amount of people to do 80 to 90 as it does to do 140.
For sure.
And cramming that amount of people, I don't want to say cramming, that's the wrong word. Nix that.
It's an industry podcast. You said cramming, and everyone listening was like,
All right.
fuck yeah, let's cram all those people in there.
No, or, risking it. We have a beautiful horseshoe bar at Santi. You can risk it a little bit. If you have a little pile up at the bar, you can send out little antipastini. You can send out, cocktails, buy a round of drinks in order to, to mitigate that problem.
There's a mixologist in Los Angeles. He recently moved to Nashville. His name's Pablo Moy, and he had consulted on our beverage program. And one of the gifts he gave me, which I give to all of my clients, is the awareness of a sparkling wine called Wycliffe. It's less than $3 a bottle. It is excellent for what it is and what it costs. And he was like, "This is liquid gold. Whenever anyone's pissed, you just pour it out until they pass out." And in fine dining, one of the things that we did was we strategically overbooked, like that was how we stayed busy. What we saw, and I mean, I could track this behavior back to 2018, was one, people are booking more last minute than they ever have before. And they also have a habit, like nobody's addicted to the open table points anymore. So like they're all booking like 2 or 3 restaurants and then deciding an hour before they go out, where they want to go. Restaurants are afraid to put credit card holds on because they don't want to dissuade the conversion. They're afraid that they'll lose business. And so, to protect ourselves, we just strategically overbooked, which worked out most of the time, probably all of the time. If you came in and you were pissed, to your point, I think you throw out a couple of cold apps, a couple of glasses of bubbles. I think people get pissed when they're waiting for the experience to start. But if the experience starts while they're waiting, you have the opportunity to salvage the relationship.
Definitely. Definitely. You got to
We're
jump
talking
on it
about
right
private.
away.
You do.
I would give a slight amendment to that. I don't think we as an entity strategically overbook. I think we right book. We really don't overbook. And because it gets crunchy sometimes, because people, at our restaurants, people love to linger. They're like, oh my God, this food is so good. And they talk about, the olive oil from Sicily for 45 minutes. And then they want to talk about the aperitivo and the next and the next. So I don't think we do it on purpose, and I don't think we take that risk. But I think we do right book. But it does happen. It does gets a little crunchy, and you got to deal with it.
Well, yeah, I mean, when you say the other side of that, go ahead.
I was just saying, you really want to make it part of the fun. It happened last night. People, I think we booked everyone at around 2.5 hours a table, and it was a very, beautiful soigné VIP. Like, it was a cool event, beautiful food. And we thought everyone would take 2.5 hours. People were like, 3 hours. We're like, we have people,
Oh my God.
So we worked the room and the people that were waiting, and we made sure they had drinks, and they were talking to each other, and they were super excited to try Michael's food for the first time. It definitely worked out.
I mean, to figure out how to appropriately book, and I think that this is really the rub for so many of us. You do have to end up, I think, ultimately overbooked on at least a couple of services. It's, for me, I would argue that my fine dining restaurant was chronically underbooked for years, right? And then we started turning back the turn times incrementally, up until the point where we broke the wheel. And that was, boys, a very unhappy day.
Sure, absolutely.
Right? The whole thing melted down. I look at this 6,000 square foot restaurant, 2 stories. And we were averaging $12,000 to $15,000 a night on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, and it felt busy. But then when I started turning back the turn times, I figured out, we could do 18, right? And it was relatively comfortable. And then I found out that we could do 20 a night, and that felt comfortable. And then we did 22 one night, and it was not worth the $2,000. It was very, very uncomfortable. That was very expensive money.
The camel's back.
It was, but then we knew like, this is the pacing for the restaurant. This is how we're able to maximize, the amount of tables and chairs that we have with this level of demand and what our turn times look like. You both seem like men to me that are fans of pushing the envelope and experimentation and, slaying sacred cows and questioning limiting beliefs within the industry. You also do some consulting. I would say, I would ask, because I know that consulting for me personally made me a better restaurateur. Looking through the lens of someone else's restaurant, it offered me a level of clarity that I didn't have in my own businesses. What are the sacred cows, the limiting beliefs that when you consult, have validated the decisions you've made within your own business that other people are able to implement?
I have one sacred cow. Again, I'm going to tell you a story, but it was always very meaningful. I helped open a Mexican restaurant in the Hamptons about 15 years ago, and it's a success story because it's still there. And we had a lot of partners, and many of them were fancy people, and it was a little bit of chaos in the first year. So the moral of this story is, don't waste money because it's really, really hard to get it back. And because the people were fancy partners and they wanted certain things, they would spend $10,000 on a brand new, system for holding glassware at the bar. That was very beautiful. And, our burritos at the time were $10. And if we made $1 profit, okay, that was our profit. And, $10,000 was, we had to sell 10,000 burritos. So we call them burrito dollars. And it's like, wait, you just put 10,000 burrito sales up on the roof, on the ceiling of the bar. Yeah, it's beautiful, but you can't do it. So when you're making the money back, and you're looking at every expenditure, you've got to be super careful. So that's one of the golden rules, as you were referencing.
Michael?
That's the best one right there. I mean, overspending, having an amazing kitchen. Of course, we all want the Rolls Royce of suites in our kitchen to cook on, and I'm very fortunate to have beautiful kitchens in all my restaurants, but they're not, the Rolls Royce. It doesn't make the food taste any better. And that's really those, when you have those big expenditures at the beginning or the outset of the restaurant, that's what can TKO a restaurant right away. you know Buying the very, very best is not going to make your cuisine that much better.
Let's talk about private events. So it came up earlier. We touched on it. You also talked about like getting a 20% net. When we eventually hit close to that, it was a blended average, right? We were averaging 6 to 8% B2C. But what I eventually figured out about my own business, my own fine dining restaurant, and this actually held true for the fast casual as well, was like the fast casual brand was open 7 days a week, 10 hours a day to promote my corporate catering business. And the fine dining restaurant was open 5 days a week, right? 6, 7 hours a day. And the only purpose of having that restaurant open was to pitch my private events business because that's where the margin was. That's where I could bake in 35% margin and I could bring in business. I still to this day, after all these years in the industry, like I don't know how to convince someone to come in on a Tuesday when they don't want to. But like I can connect with an office manager that needs to host a holiday party and I can spend their 10 grand better than they can, you know? So how do private events function within the overall business strategy of the organization?
Bruce, go ahead.
Private events are especially important to Santi.
For sure.
And we have a private dining room, and we looked at the event space, and we looked at our competition. We looked at what people were doing, and most of the people out there take a big white room, big white box, bunch of small tables. You can bank them any way you want. You can put rounds on top of them. You could do 4 4s. You could do 3 rounds. You could and it was very plain vanilla, to be honest. And we looked at our private dining room. We said, it goes along with this whole design aesthetic of our restaurant. But we were like, we want the sexiest dining room in New York City. Our PDR is super sexy. It's dark, it's sultry. We have a black marble table that's, looks like a boardroom table, but like you can put your grandmother in there, you could have a birthday party, you could have a business meeting. It's highly functional and super sexy. And then we realized, just as you were saying, that the margins of private events are really, really high. They're much higher than regular. And again, with our credo, we're like, we have competitors for similar size rooms who will charge $18,000-$20,000, for an event, and we don't. We charge, I think it's $4,000. I'm not exactly certain, but it's around that. And it's like, look, we do a price fix. It's $4,000 minimum for up to 16 people. So it's not crazy. It's much less expensive. It's a real value proposition. If you want to go in there and drink DRCs off our menu and drink, Cheval Blanc or TNLO, you can, and you can go crazy, but you're going to have a great experience, because we want that. If it's not 30%, as you were saying, if it's maybe 18% or 15%, whatever it is, we want that room booked every meal period, every lunch and
Yeah.
every dinner.
And I think the most important thing when it comes to private dining, we speak about it in all restaurants. I don't care if it's Mika in Coral Gables, everywhere. When someone calls, you have to be responsive within an hour, or you can't let it drag whatsoever, because people have to make events, they have to schedule events for whether it be a private event for a personal, they're going on to next. They are not going to wait around for you to get back to them. And that is our credo at the restaurant. You must get back to the people within the fastest possible.
For sure. There's this startling statistic that when someone makes an inbound inquiry, if you reply within 1 minute, you are 391% more likely to close that client. And it holds true because, to your point, nobody's trying to book with you. They're just trying to book, and you're one of the people that they reached out to. A huge part of it is just stopping the prospecting process. That you're the
Yep.
last restaurant they reach out to.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean that's a fascinating statistic. I'm a little bit psycho with my phone, and I have like the whole VIPN speed dial. I literally, when my VIPs want a reservation and they text me, I literally respond within 10 seconds. It's always on, like, I'm creating adjective for me not to have my phone turned on for this interview, but literally 10 seconds they get a reservation and they count on it. They love it. They love it.
For sure. It's again, so much of what I think you guys have discussed in this, because, we haven't gotten into like the mechanics that everyone else talks about, as it relates to price and portion size and, the stories that you're telling on social media. I think that true marketing is positioning. I think that that's the weakest point of almost any restaurant, and perceived value. And I think that you guys have done an exceptional job of not tying perceived value to price or portion size, but to experience, because everyone in your competitive set sells food and beverage. And by and large, I mean, especially when you look at like New York as an example, there's a ton of great stuff out there, right?
There
So
really
what
is.
delineates
Most
you
definitely.
is the eating and drinking. It's not the food and beverage. If we were to look at best practices, right, the things that you guys have learned separately, collectively over the years and brought from your separate career paths, if we can assume that there are no successful people, they're just successful habits when executed consistently that create successful lives. What are the tactics, the tools, the strategies that we could steal from you, internalize, and execute in our own lives and businesses to achieve the same level of success?
I have my own personal one that I learned. I learned it at Santi, and working with Michael. So when we opened this restaurant, Michael's flagship, his return to New York, a very important restaurant, back to where Alto existed, 2-star Michelin, where we met, in fact. I my role is to deal with like sort of all of the non-food things. So it's a lot of administrivia and accounting and finance and law, contracts and HR, like all of these other things. I didn't know what my role was going to be at this restaurant. I didn't really see it at night. In the first week, we're all super excited and we're having our VIPs and fancy people are coming in and there's an air of excitement. And I would walk to the tables and I would check in on people, like some of these great maitre d's of fame, Nelly of the Polo Bar and the guy who had worked for Danielle and people who have worked for Michael. And when I would touch the table, people would be like thrilled. And I had no idea that it would be so thrilling for patrons. And so people would feel honored, blessed, respected if an owner touched the table. And I'm there now. I'm there every night. And it's a little bit addicting. And it is a point of service delivery that I feel that many other restaurants don't have. And it sets us apart in a lot of ways. And people they like it. They like that point of contact and they feel like they're cherished. So that's the biggest learning thing for me personally.
It's all about how you make someone feel. I mean, that's really how they leave your restaurant. They're satiated. I go out to the table and say hello to somebody. You're taking pictures with somebody during a birthday or an anniversary. It's that type of service that really helps. Sorry about the bell.
You're good. We did it, guys. We